Welcome, kitties. Welcome, kitties. Welcome to my humble little shack. Oh, please come in. Come in. And be sure to stay for supper. I even have some cookies. Never mind the lunch, just shoo 'em away, they don't eat much. Oh, don't look so shy. I only want to tell you some stories. Well, actually, my nephew Bloodwing will read them to you if the old eyes aren't what they used to be. But by the time we're done with the stories, then you should be ready for supper. Our first story is about the country. A nice view in the country can be very relaxing. A few trees, some fields, little snow. But the thing about trees are, you never quite know what they're hiding.
When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. This wasn't a regular farm that you would expect with fields full of beans and stuff. It was actually a pine tree harvestery. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, and so we lived basically in the woods, and we would bale the pine straw every year. Whatever. The point is that my house was in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined longleaf pines. My living room had a huge picture window. I won't go into the architecture of the house, but it was a weird custom job built by some dentist in the 1930s. The window in the living room stretched nearly the entire length of the room, maybe 50 feet. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground. So you had something of an angle to look out at a solid mile of pine trees. During the winter, it was unsettling because you'd get just a bit of snow, enough to reflect moonlight so you could see the dogs running around at night. I'll be honest, I hated that room and that window. So now to the relevant part. I had a cousin over for the weekend, and we were doing what kids do in the country, throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what happens. It is getting late, and the fire's dying down, so we build the big kingdom of couch cushions and blankets in the living room and get ready for bed. Nothing out of the ordinary, till we hear the dogs barking. They were really far away. The property stretches for nearly a mile, so I just assumed they were chasing off whatever animal felt like crapping in my yard. So my cousin is staring out the window and not saying anything, which prompts the standard, "What's up?" He just kind of keeps staring and says he feels like he's seeing things. Naturally, I get all anxious and start staring out the window as well. Nothing happens for a few minutes, and he gets more and more annoyed with me because I'm asking what he saw. He keeps shushing me so that he can focus. And then we both see it. A shadow of a person moves from one tree to the next. Not a run, not a leap, just a brisk walk from one tree to another. This is probably 100 yards out from the house. We can't actually tell if the person is coming closer or not because we're dealing with moonlight reflecting off the snow, slush, and ice. I guess the crazy part is that we didn't so much freak out, because at this point there is still that chance that we didn't see what we saw, you know? So we just kept staring. We should have gone to wake up my dad, but he's an idiot and the kind of guy to walk out on the patio and holler into the woods with his rifle. We were just scared enough to agree that we don't want to taunt whatever's happening. So about 3 minutes later, it happens again. But a good 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another person. Another tree. A few strides and they were gone. This happened every few minutes for the next half hour, and we just stared. At this point, I should mention that I didn't really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was federal paper. I don't know who owns it now. So it was miles and miles of uncultivated trees. You don't see people around the farm unless they intend to be there. So we keep watching as these two figures intermittently appear and vanish, until finally we see one appear, but not disappear. Instead, we focus in on it and see that it's now running forward. We lose our stuff and go wake my dad. By the time we get into the room with my half-awake father, there is no one to be seen. We sprint around, locking doors and windows. Keep in mind that we're out in the country with no one around. It rarely occurs to lock doors. Every door was worse than the last because you just know that as soon as you reach the door, someone is going to be trying to open it, although that never happened. We locked everything up, walked around the house at least 50 times, making sure no one got in without us knowing, and then convinced my dad to fall asleep in the living room with us while we stared out the window. I never understood why my dad wouldn't call the police. He always had this "we take care of our own" mentality, and it simply wasn't an option to call 911. The next day, we went out to look, and absolutely, there were footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between trees, and then we finally saw where someone had been standing right in front of the window. But as I said, I wouldn't have seen them because while I'm 7 feet up in the living room, they would have been right beneath me.
I don't know what he was so upset about. It was just the neighbors bringing over a casserole, probably. Welcome wagon. You know the thing. Oh well. Not everybody's the neighborly sort, I suppose. Which brings us to our next story. Everybody knows that the soldiers, the military, protect us on foreign shores, protect our freedoms, and make sure that we're able to live in peace here on the home shores. In fact, you could say that the soldiers are out there looking out for us, watching over us. But who watches the soldiers?
While I was deployed in Kosovo, my team did a lot of night missions that required us to cover a great deal of ground in a short period of time in order to make our extractions. All of it while remaining undetected by anyone in the areas that would pass through. We would always seem to see odd things during the night, but nothing like this. During one of our recon missions, we had started by getting dropped off in a remote location to identify whether shipments of mortar rounds and mines were being moved through the area. Our extract was going to be before daybreak, and we needed to make it just over 17 kilometers. The terrain wasn't too overgrown, and we had good intel over the area, and it was either a full moon or close to it. Of course it would be for this story. So unless we encountered somebody, this was going to be an easy night. Our team was normally only 4 men, but we had the opportunity to make this a good training run for some of the new guys, and we took on an extra 3. We still wanted to make sure we played it safe though, so I took rear security, and, we'll call him L, took the position just in front of me. We both worked great together and could easily manage to cover our team if needed. We moved about 10K through our mission area without finding anything, and had made good time doing it. At this point, we needed to start heading for our extraction point, which was located over a good-sized hill and then through an area that was near a village, but not too close. We regrouped, did a count of people, ammo and supplies, and moved out. Being rear security, I was the last to move, and just as I was about to take off, I heard a noise in the trees, maybe 50 meters off. I turned and saw Elle looking at the direction as well. He'd heard it too. Everyone else was still moving, since the new guys were in the middle and were not used to looking back every 20 meters to spot your security. We were getting left. Chances were that the noise was nothing more than a deer, but Elle and I started moving out, using a two-man bounding technique. We kept hearing a noise, so I told Elle to reach the team, while I remained in place after our next bound. I found a place with cover, and he bolted after the team. I heard the noise again, and then saw trees move about 15 meters in front of me. Everything stopped. 2 minutes went by with me being very quiet, controlling my breathing, watching my front and sides. Elle and my team were slowly making their way to engage whatever had been following us. They came up on the sides and surrounded the area I signaled to. Once in position, I moved up. Nothing. Not footprints, tracks, or any sign that something had been there. Cue the guys giving Elle and I a hard time for getting left alone and scared. Good-hearted fun, of course. We moved out again. Again, I am the last to move, with Elle being between myself and the next man to the front. This time, no noises when I stepped away. After about 2K, we came up to an orchard that we needed to move through. The light from the moon was really bright, and the trees were spaced, so we used them for cover as we stayed near the middle of the orchard. Just before I enter, I hear the noise again. This time, I thought I heard a little girl giggling. Not something that my imagination would make up on its own. I was expecting wildlife, if anything. This time, Elle had taken off an additional 20 meters and turned to wait for me. I moved to my location, and he moved out again. I was crouched next to a tree waiting for anything. All of a sudden, the tree I was next to caught my attention in the knots on the tree. I could see a face that looked like a person. As I squinted and looked more closely, a little girl's face appears and she turns at me smiling, waving a little hand and giggles, not maliciously, then disappears back into the tree. I am in absolute shock at this point, and there is not a chance in heck that I am going back to my team to report what I just saw. So instead, I bolt and catch up to Elle and keep my mouth shut. Recognizing that I likely have lost my mind, I'm not going to talk about anything. We hit our extract and leave. 2 weeks go by, and I am told that I am needed to provide security for a team of combat engineers who are going to an area I am familiar with. In the meantime, my team was going to be going through the area we were in 2 weeks ago, where Elle and I got scared, everyone laughing. Again, I never said a word to anyone about what I saw. In my mind, I am quite happy about not going back there. So I go out with the engineers and help them find a minefield that had been recently laid in an area that kids walk through every day. And they take care of informing the village nearby while starting to blow the mines in place. I really appreciate the engineers and the work they did out there. I get back and am taken to see my commander and told thanks for the work. Feeling great, I head back to my barracks room, a place I rarely get to visit, and see that none of the guys are back yet. No sooner than taking my boots off, the door opens and I hear everyone laughing as they enter. Elle is not laughing, and telling everyone to screw themselves. One of the other guys sees me and blurts out, "Hey man, Al says he isn't going on patrol with us anymore in your favorite spot." I just grimace and wait for stuff to calm down. A couple of days later, Al and I are out playing babysitter to some scouts. He says, "What did you see that night?" I shrug and say, "I don't know. Just my imagination getting the better of me." He then says something that sent chills up my spine. "I know you saw her. I saw her too. Tell me I'm not crazy." I felt numb and just said, "You're not crazy. Where did you see her?" He said, "Inside a tree." I had never given any information to Elle about what I saw, or details that could have led for him to come up with the same conclusion. When I saw the girl in the tree, Elle was 40 meters away from my location and could not have even seen me looking at the tree.
I think I shall never see a thing as lovely as a tree. Well, of course, unless it's the little girl that lives in the tree. And now our final story. And supper will be ready soon. This next story is actually one that my nephew Blood Wayne wrote himself. Urban exploration is quite popular on YouTube right now, but what happens when the explorer runs into the unexplored?
"This has to be my dumbest idea ever," Ben said to himself as he cinched his pack back up on his shoulders for the umpteenth time. The hardened desert ground crunched under his feet as he plodded along, reaching up to adjust the night vision goggles every couple of minutes. He had bought the goggles the previous day from a local army surplus store, feeling he probably overpaid a little, but he knew he really needed them. His only other alternative was a flashlight, and that would certainly get him busted. "Come at night," he said. "Park your car here and walk in," he said. "I swear if I end up in some military gulag, I'm going to kill Jack." Jack was Ben's friend that sometimes came on these explorations with Ben, often working as the cameraman. You see, Jack had one of those YouTube urban exploration channels, one which was actually quite popular. The pair explored the usual old houses, asylums, tunnels, etc. that you see on these channels. Ben and Jack always knew there was a risk of getting arrested for trespass, but this trip was on a whole other level. The Nevada nuclear test site was federal land after all, and watched by military patrols. Getting caught here was likely to bring much more than the usual slap on the wrist the local cops gave for being in a half-demolished house without permission. "How did I talk myself into this one?" he asked himself, and not for the first time. He thought back to how it had all started. Jack had arrived at Ben's apartment all wild-eyed and waving around a crumpled sheet of paper. Ben! Dude, we have so got to do this," Jack cried. "Slow down, man. What in the heck are you talking about?" That seemed to slow Jack down enough to take a deep breath and explain his excitement. "Dude, we have to go here for our next video. Man, the views will be through the roof." Ben snatched the piece of crumpled paper that Jack was now offering as if it explained everything, and looked it over as Jack went on with his story. I won't bore you with the whole conversation, but it boiled down to this. The paper was a map, crudely drawn, of a portion of the Nevada test site. On it was marked where to park, what path to take to the fence, and the path to follow to avoid the patrols. Jack had been passed the paper from some guy who swore to its validity, it having come from a friend of a friend of a friend, of course. According to Jack, following this map would lead them safely into what was left of the fake town, built to test the effects of a nuclear blast near Apple II Ground Zero. This would be the urban exploration video of a lifetime. Now, even though he took risks all the time, all for the sake of YouTube views, Ben was no dummy. He knew the risk of capture by military patrol was high. Part of the site is still active, after all, and the desert at night was certainly no place for a city kid like him. And then there was this small little problem of radiation. 928 nuclear tests had been conducted there, after all. 828 of those were underground. But still. But for all his inner reservations, Jack somehow talked him into it. Jack had, however, backed out at the last minute. He said there had been a death in the family in Illinois and he had to go. "Thanks a lot, you chump," Ben had shouted as Jack pulled away, not believing the story for a minute. But the show must go on, right? So here he was, trudging across the Nevada desert, wearing night vision goggles and waving the Geiger counter he had also bought at the surplus store from time to time. So far the levels had been what was deemed acceptable. Well, according to the website he'd looked them up on anyway. Besides, he had taken the potassium iodide pills the man at the surplus store said would protect him, as long as he did not overstay his welcome at high levels. So he'd be just fine, right? Even his reckless 20-something mind questioned this. But on he went. In his pack he had also brought plenty of bottled water, some trail mix, and extra batteries for the video camera. Said camera was in the hand not holding the Geiger counter, ready to record when he had arrived at the Apple II houses. To his surprise, the map had so far proven correct, as he had yet to see even the slightest sign of a patrol after he had passed through the small hidden hole in the fence. But the eerily quiet was beginning to unsettle him quite a bit. Surely even a desert, there are noises at night, he had thought to himself. But he shivered a second and trudged on. He stopped to look again at the crumpled makeshift map and calculated silently that he surely must be nearly at the houses. After walking a few more 100 feet, he was sure he could make out the outline of one of them. Elated, he smiled to himself and nearly sprinted in that direction. His mind was whirling with the thoughts of how popular this video would be. But after another 50 yards or so, he slid to a dead halt. There was something else. Something unexpected here. The first thing that had caught his attention was an electrical zap, followed immediately by an intense coppery smell in the air, like burning ozone. He turned his head to the right, the direction the zap had come from, and that's when he saw it and put on the brakes. In a rough circle about 10 feet in diameter, the air was shimmering, almost like a mirage. But it was night, and the temperature had long since dropped, so it couldn't be a mirage. Slowly he walked toward the shimmering air, using what caution and bravery his mind could muster. As he got within 20 feet of the phenomena, he halted, stunned. It was him. He could see himself walking towards the area, as if he was looking into some large, strange mirror. Again he mustered up his courage and walked forward, the mirror image aping his every move. He eased the night goggles up to the top of his head to get a better look, as the apparition was giving off its own ghostly glow. He stopped just 5 feet away and wondered aloud. What in the world? What the heck can cause this? I mean, a big mirror? Just out of The rest of the statement caught in his throat. It was at this point he realized he was not looking at an exact mirror image. Oh sure, that was his likeness he was looking at, but his eyes were odd. Almost totally black they were, with no whites at all. And the scene behind the image did not exactly match the scene behind himself. It was very close, sure, but not exact. The scenery behind the image was more blackened, somehow more sinister than that behind Ben. Suddenly remembering the video camera in his hand, Ben immediately brought it up to start recording this thing. But this time, the mirror Ben did not match his movements, but instead straightened up, smiled warmly, and waved as if Ben was a neighbor out for a stroll. What the? This is no mirror. But what is it? Now, Ben was no scientist by any stretch, but he'd seen enough movies and TV shows on the subject to begin putting two and two together. I bet this is some kind of mirror into another dimension, a parallel Earth. Maybe the bombs tore a hole between the two. Wrapped in his thought, Ben had walked closer to the tear, reaching up his hand as if to feel the surface of the mirror. He did not notice the smile of his doppelganger widen, nor his eyes darken. "Hey, kid, step away from that. Get away now!" Ben snapped his head around at the sound of the unexpected voice behind him. He saw 3 heavily armed soldiers dashing across the desert towards him, weapons raised. But before Ben could raise his hands and shout, "Don't shoot!" several pairs of arms with gnarled and seriously clawed hands shot out of the mirror, grabbing Ben and yanking him off his feet and straight into the mirror. Almost immediately the apparition closed in on itself, disappearing into the dark desert night. But not fast enough that the soldiers could not hear the pained screams of Ben, as well as the wet, gory sounds of Ben being torn apart and eaten by a dozen greedy, fanged maws. Stupid kids. Why do they keep coming here? One of the soldiers lamented. One of his compatriots bent down and picked up the camera Ben had dropped, as well as the makeshift map, which he offered to the third soldier. "It's another one of those maps, Sarge. We'd better take this and the camera back to post. Don't want them falling into the wrong hands." The sergeant takes the map, turns it over back and forth in his hand. "Just like the others. You don't think these, whatever they are, have agents on this side sending them victims, do you?" "I don't want to think about that, Sarge," the first soldier replies. With a sigh of resignation and a shrug, the sergeant goes on. "Well, might as well head back and get some rest. We'll have to come back early tomorrow morning. If it's like all the other times, there'll be a pile of bloody bones to clean up."
Poor Ben. It's a shame he couldn't have saved the footage on that camera. Got it to his friend Jack. Why, with all the views they'd have got from that, they could have been bigger than PewDiePie. Well, that's the end of the stories. Well, where'd they go? I lose more meals, guests that way. Well, until next time, kiddies. Pleasant nightmares.